Hello, welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. I think this is our fourth, maybe fifth one.
Fifth, I think. I think
I
this
lose
is fifth.
track already.
Fifth.
Yeah, blimey, it's time's flying. So last week we answered a popular question, which is, who are we? Who are Craig and Dave? What did we do before teaching? Why did we become teachers? And how did we finally meet? So if you remember back, Dave was actually my pathway mentor when I was a trainee teacher. But what we didn't answer, which is the focus of today's video, is how did our company, and it wasn't a company at first, but how did this notion of Craig and Dave start, the YouTube channel, and what we do? Because obviously we'd got into teaching, Dave before me, and then I trained, but we were off on our own thing. Dave was being a head of department and running training for Gloucester. I went off and got various promotions, head of department. But ever since, I think it's fair to say that ever since I was training with you, we had quite a good connection. We were similar sort of minds. We were always striving to make sure that what we were doing was what we thought was the best we could be doing. We were always quite questioning, like, how are we teaching? Why are we teaching like that? So we did keep in contact, but it's fair to say it was infrequent. The reality of teaching is it is quite it's rewarding, but it is an all-consuming impression. I can't speak. An all-consuming profession. So we would meet, wouldn't we? Like during a half term for an afternoon a day. We'd exchange resources. We'd typically meet on training courses. I would have all these ideas. Oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this together? And the reality was we'd get back from whatever that was, and the reality of teaching got back in, and we probably wouldn't chat again for another 2-3 terms. So yeah, hand over to you then, Dave. So I know obviously something changed at some point that made us make the company. So yeah, what changed?
Yeah, so like you say, we were meeting kind of infrequently. Partly it was sort of keeping in touch because you were one of my old trainees, and like you say, I was your old mentor, and it was partly about keeping in touch. And to be fair, the teaching community in Gloucestershire traditionally was quite close knit, and we would see each other and our paths would cross from time to time as we went to local training events, and that's still true today. We've got a great little community of teachers here in Gloucestershire, and just slightly north too. But I would sometimes go on training courses, and sometimes they were in London. And I'm not a great lover of the big city. I'm a country lad, to be perfectly honest with you. So if I could go to the big city with somebody else, I'd always find that a little bit easier, I suppose. Yeah. So I would frequently say to Craig, "Oh, Craig, there's a training course in London. Do you fancy it?" And I would always be able to get out on these training courses because my school was always like, "Oh yeah, we'll invest in the professional development of the teachers." And so it was great. I was able to get out quite regularly. Craig, on the other hand, had much more of a battle, as I seem to remember, trying to get on to training courses. Yeah. But there was a course that you kind of had to attend, really, because the exam board were changing the specifications at A-level. So a specification tends to live normally between about sort of 5 to 8 years, something like that. And the specification had been around for quite a while.
This was A-level, wasn't it? This was the A-level
A-level, yeah. And it was 2014, and they were going to bring in a new A-level specification in 2015. And so it was kind of expected that you would go to the exam board introduction events for them to, get you on the straight and narrow with the new specification. And so I said to Craig, "Oh, do you fancy going to London, and we'll go on this together?" That's what we did. And we went to this training course, and it was delivered by an OCR representative. And it was quite frustrating, actually, from my perspective. I don't know what you felt about that training, Craig.
Yeah, I have quite vivid memories of it. I'm very careful not to speak bad of OCR because we think they are a fabulous exam board. I mean, we teach them for a very good reason. Other exam boards exist. But I wasn't particularly pleased with this particular event. There wasn't a huge amount of clarity. And the thing that really hit me was when we started looking at and pulling apart the new A-level specification. Now, bear in mind everything from last week: a degree in computer science, industry experience as a programmer. Dave's on a similar journey. I'm looking at the new A-level, and I've been teaching, the outgoing A-level spec for the past sort of X years. I looked at the new spec. I remember like a lump in my throat, kind of nervousness, going, "What is some of this content? This is hard. I don't remember doing some of this till back in my degree course." Like, everything had come down to it. There was stuff I'd never heard of. And I'm like, how can this be? I've got a degree, I've had a job, I'm a teacher. And I remember coming away thinking, if I'm being really honest, I'm not sure I can teach this new A-level. I mean, this really, I'm jumping ahead maybe, this really is the crux of where Craig and Dave came from, isn't it? We looked at when we're going to have trouble teaching this new A-level. If we're feeling like this, I'm not trying to be arrogant, but if we're feeling like this with our background and our degrees and our commercial experience, what must many other teachers in the profession be feeling? There was a real step change in what they wanted in the new A-level.
Yeah, well, let's take a step back for a second, because of course we had really entered the teaching profession as teachers of ICT. So although we had although our backgrounds were in computer science and programming, we were actually teaching office skills and, animation and graphics and those kinds of things is what we were actually teaching. Tiny bit of programming, but it was A-level. And that's why you and I both liked teaching A-level, because it had that sort of meaty programming content that you weren't getting anywhere else in your teaching at the time.
And back then there wasn't even a GCSE. The pilot for it started in about 2010. So maybe I think there were a couple of schools doing it, but we didn't jump on the GCSE very early. So the only way to do computer science was at A-level. Yeah,
we didn't jump on it straight away. That's right. I'll tell you why, though. I mean, we're going off on a tangent here, but the reason for me was because I thought, A-level was quite tough. Yeah. And programming, I thought, was quite hard for students to get to grips with. And I didn't really consider that younger students were going to cope with it particularly well. So I didn't fancy the idea of doing a GCSE that contained programming when I knew my A-level students were already struggling with programming. But of course, what's happened over the years is, as they've introduced programming into Key Stage 3, it means now that students at Key Stage 4 are more confident. And then when they get to Key Stage 5, they're even more confident, or at least that's the hope. But of course, back in those days, people were doing A-level computer science as a student, having never done anything else to do with computer science previously, other than a bit of word processing and a bit of Excel, that kind of thing. Anyway, we digress. And I was frustrated by the course, because I remember the person at the front saying, when questions started to arise about the project, he would say, don't do games for projects. They're too easy. There's no real algorithms in them. And I was horrified, actually, because one of the reasons that you convinced me, Craig, to go with OCR, because I was teaching another exam board prior to that. You probably don't remember. And you said to me, Dave, you should teach OCR. And I was like, no, I already know what I'm doing with this exam board. Why would I want to change it? And you said, well, for a start, because with the project, you can do what you want, or, the students can pretty much do what they want. And that includes games. And I was like, games? Because of course, from my childhood memories, and we've already covered that in previous videos, I was very much into games and writing little simple games. And I thought, the students are going to really enjoy this. This will be fantastic. This is going to elevate my A-level, but only with OCR, So you convinced me to change the exam board and do OCR. And so when we went on this course and they said at the front, games are no good for projects, I was kind of like, you're joking. Have you ever programmed a game? Because if you have, it's not trivial, and that they're chocked full of algorithms and data structures. And I was just like really frustrated with the presentation. You came away completely scared, and I came away scared as well, because there were concepts that I hadn't studied on my degree, and people don't realize this. And maybe, I don't know how unique it is to computer science, but the stuff that you learnt on your degree ends up coming down to A level, and the stuff that you teach at A level ends up going down to GCSE, and the stuff that you teach at GCSE ends up going down to Key Stage 3. So you're on a continual treadmill. So when we've been in teaching for a decade or more, of course, the stuff we learnt on our degree is not as relevant as it once was. And there's new stuff coming into the specification that we never studied. Studied.
I mean, as I said in the previous video, I didn't do a computer science A-level, wasn't on offer at my school. My degree was normalization and floating point binary, network protocols, normalization in databases. Well, I teach all that in the A-level now, not at degree. That's almost expected knowledge. And parts of the stuff I talked about there are covered in the GCSE. And plenty of schools do Key Stage 3 modules on the basics of networking and databases. So you're right, it's all coming down. And our profession evolves, our subject evolves so quickly. So
the profession does as well. But
very true.
I mean, I remember, because you're a very methodical sort of person, and I remember you taking the specification and color coding it. Green, stuff that you could teach, not a problem. Didn't even need to say this. Do it off the top of your head if you had to. Sort of yellow or amber, which was, I probably could do this, but I'm going to need a few props. It would be okay, but I need a bit of a brush up and make sure I've got a PowerPoint or something. And then red, which was, I can't teach this, I need to learn it, and then I need to make the sources for it. And I remember you showing me this color-coded spec that you did, because I'm the sort of bloke that just does a quick flip through and thinks, oh, it'll be all right on the night, you know. But you were very methodical, and you showed me this specification, and it was full of red. And I remember you saying to me, do you know about this? Kind of pointing out some random red line, and I was like, I haven't got a clue. And it dawned on us, I think, at that moment that, oh my goodness, hang on a minute. We always knew we had the capacity to learn new things because our background was in computer science. And so we could apply computational thinking to the problem, learn the new stuff, produce resources, and we become very comfortable with it very, very quickly. And we had that inner confidence. But we knew that because the subject was changing at that time from ICT to computing, that other teachers that want to come into the profession as IT teachers, and they probably come from other disciplines like design technology or maths or wherever, and they came into ICT, now all of a sudden they're being expected to teach computer science instead of ICT. And if we're looking at the new specification and thinking, oh, that's a bit tough, we don't know much about this, how is everyone else going to feel?
That's very much it. I mean, and that is the essence really of where Craig and Dave started. We'd already up till this point been sharing a lot of resources and new ideas, but it was a kind of, and people had been asking us for them. We used to, we would share them, freely with friends and colleagues in other schools. But I think it was the end of that course. We were sat in Paddington Station, I think, waiting. We had quite a while. I remember we went and got some food, and we had quite a while to go, and we were just digesting it all. And I think it's probably fair to say that is the seed of where Craig and Dave, the company, or what you know today, came from. It was Paddington Station in London. We had an hour or two to kill. We were digesting the course, and we were like, no, let's come up with an approach for this. Let's resource this new course. Let's do it well. Let's do it to a standard that we would be comfortable and happy to teach, because we're going to have to do it anyway. We don't have most of this material. This is a new challenge and a start. As opposed to doing it ourselves and just sharing it with each other, let's do it and share it with the wider community of teachers, because we know they're going to want it and need it. Or that was the thought. And
sorry, Craig. I was going to say, for me, there was something else in there as well. And I don't know if you were about to come on to this, but teachers can't help themselves but reinvent the wheel all the time. There's this kind of built-in sort of, if I haven't prepared this material, then it's not good enough sort of philosophy. And part of that, was down to teacher training. So I was partly responsible for this, because there was an expectation that trainees would create their own new materials in order to deliver their lessons. And if you were taking someone else's lesson plans or schemes of work off the shelf and things like that, then somehow that wasn't good enough. That wasn't going to get you your teaching qualification. You had to prove that you could plan, deliver, and reflect and evaluate on lessons.
Yeah.
And so I think it was built into everybody that when you became a teacher, you never sort of took on what someone else had made. You always made your own stuff. And I remember us thinking at one point, hang on a minute. So you've made these resources, I'm making these resources. All we're doing is reinventing the wheel. Sure, we're delivering it in different ways. Sure, we've created a different PowerPoint or worksheet or whatever. But by and large, because the specification is the same that we're both delivering, we're both trying to get to the same end point. It's just how we got to the end point is going to be different. And I think for me, the light bulb moment was, if my lesson planning and delivery is good enough for my students, then it should be good enough for yours, and vice versa. So if you're planning a worksheet or a lesson of some kind, and it's good enough for your students in your school, then why would it not be good enough for students in my school? And wouldn't we be better off planning something together or planning it individually, then getting together and saying, right, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, these will be the problems with this lesson, pulling it apart, reflecting on it, evaluating it, and actually coming up with something after a period of, cyclic evaluation that actually works for us both in both contexts, because we were both in comprehensive secondary school, so there was no reason why that shouldn't be the case. So that's what it was for me as well.
Yeah, we're kind of veering now into like the next couple of questions, which I think we're going to answer together, which you're right, which is, so, we come to this realization that we were going to do this. So really then it comes on to, so what were we trying to achieve? And Dave's kind of already touched on that. And also, so what is the best way that we should be teaching and developing these resources? Very quick sidebar before we do, I should point out that moment in Paddington really was the formation of Craig and Dave. I should point out we talked probably half a dozen times over the previous years of maybe we should put our resources online and see if people would buy them. But as I said, it never happened. Within 24 hours of that Paddington train station, we had craiganddave.co.uk domain name registered. We had a basic website behind the scenes. We had our Facebook page sorted, and we had our Twitter handle reserved. Although we couldn't get at Craig and Dave, if you remember, we're at Craig and Dave 1. So it really did happen then. Within 24 hours, we'd reserved all the various social media bits. Now it took a while before anything.
Those early days before we get into how to teach, people used to call us Chaz and Dave. People used to call us Craig David, and all sorts of things.
Still do.
A bit of a nightmare, but I forgot what I was going to say now, Craig. I'll come back to it in a minute.
It's all right. So really, we kind of outlined what we were trying to achieve. We were trying to achieve a comprehensive set of resources that would cover the new A-level, and it was the A-level from OCR initially. Now we've spread then to GCSE and the new specs and other exam boards, but initially it was OCR A-level. Let's resource this fully so teachers can take it, they can feel confident. Go on, Dave, look like you've remembered.
Sorry, I just remembered what I was going to say. The other frustration, because you were right, people were asking us for materials. And what was getting frustrating was that we would work hard because we really believed in delivering the best possible lessons. And so we would spend evenings and weekends and holidays working, making things. When they didn't work as well as we wanted them to in the classroom, we would make them again and change them and get together and talk about it. And then someone would just sort of pipe up and say, oh, can I have a copy of those worksheets, please? And it's like, do you realize the number of iterations and blood, sweat and tears and things that have gone into all this? Why is it fair that we spend all our evenings, weekends and holidays working on this stuff when we could be out in the sunshine with our families, and you just sort of take it for nothing without giving us anything back? Now, we're all for collaboration. So if people take our materials and then they give us something back, well, that's absolutely fine. But that wasn't happening, was it?
Yeah, I do remember that. And it's not like we didn't share a huge amount of material. I mean, we did, and we used to. But yes, I think that's probably true as well. So so that's why Craig and Dave started. Now we've kind of covered what we're trying to achieve. But because this was a new start, it was a new course, there was a lot of content. We were like, well, what's the best way to teach? Now, quick caveat, there is no best way to teach. Okay. But we did have one fundamental problem. We weren't suddenly going to overnight be told we had double the number of A-level lessons to deliver this new spec. You know, whatever it was, I can't remember now, 6 hours a week to deliver the old A-level. I knew there'd be 6 hours a week to deliver the new A-level. Yet if you put the old A-level and the new spec together, I was like, this is just a lot more content. Not only the fact that I don't know what a lot of it is yet, I'll learn that, but it's a lot of content. How do I cram all this content into the same number of hours while still delivering the same quality of education and hoping the students get the same depth of understanding? And that led us to a very different way to teach for the pair of us, which I think has become quite synonymous with Craig and Dave. Do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah,
this was like a revelation moment, wasn't it? And it was your revelation moment, really.
I can't claim credit for the pedagogy, though. We'll come on to that in a second. But I had a slightly different experience because I felt that I probably could do it, but I'd probably convinced myself of that without any sort of analysis, because I sort of, I could make it up as I was going along. And perhaps I hadn't realized at the time, how big the challenge was going to be of the new specification. But for me, I'd noticed something happening in my classroom. I had become quite formulaic. Now, people will say that our resources with our videos and the flipped classroom approach and things is quite formulaic. And I think in another video, we're going to address that head on and explain why it's not formulaic unless you're doing it badly. But for now, I'd noticed that my lessons had become very formulaic. Now, I was trained to teach by showing the students a PowerPoint, going through the PowerPoint, they make notes, and then you do some programming. And that was the sort of extent of my teacher training. Because when I trained to teach, I was only exposed to year 7 for tutor period and years 12 and 13 for A-level. That's how I trained to teach. I'd had no experience of delivering lessons to younger students, which suited me because I wanted to get into the profession to do A-level anyway. So I was all right with that. But I noticed that my lessons had become just like that, just how I had trained to teach. I'd put a PowerPoint on the board, I'd go through it, the students would make some notes, I'd ask some questions, we'd do some programming. That was it. Every lesson was very similar. And I was getting great results. Results were not a problem, okay? I was getting some of the best results in the school. It wasn't an issue. But I'll tell you what, my students were bored. They were bored. And I did have a moment in one lesson in around the 2014 time where a student was literally nodding off in my lesson because they were bored of the PowerPoint delivery. It just wasn't engaging. They weren't active enough. And at the same time, lesson observations were kind of being ramped up, and there was an expectation that students would be more active. They would take more charge of their own learning journey, and lessons would be a lot more dynamic. And so it was no longer acceptable just to put a PowerPoint on the board and go through it. That was considered quite poor teaching. So something had to change, and I was looking for something completely different.
No, it's very much true. And if you think about it, you say put a PowerPoint on the board and just go through it. I mean, essentially, that is the Victorian style of teaching. It's how we've been taught. It's how your parents have been taught. It's how your grandparents have been taught. Sure, it wasn't a PowerPoint. Before that, it was an OHP. And before that, it was someone standing at a chalkboard. But it's you come in. What are we learning today? Well, let me talk to you for 10, 15, 20 minutes while I tell you. And if you're lucky, you'll do a few little group activities and I'll give you some homework. There's nothing wrong with it in essence. And, it can be spiced up, and teacher relationships, obviously, and the ability to engage have a big impact. But the point is, it was the way you taught. I stood at the front and I imparted my knowledge this way for a certain length of time, and then you consolidated it with activities in and out of the classroom. And this was a fresh start for us to turn around and say, we're going to do something different. Now, a lot of you watching this may know already. I'm going to start out. It's the flipped classroom method. Now, what I don't want to do is get into a big discussion about the flipped classroom method now, because this is a whole separate video, and I've put a little link at the bottom there. That's a video on our channel, a quick link that just, it's a real nice animation that explains what flipped classroom is. And I'm pretty sure we could do another whole couple of videos on the pedagogy. So I want to be careful not to do that. But this is the real reason, and maybe we can talk about this in a second, Dave. This is the reason the YouTube channel came about, which I think that would be nice to touch on. So yes, do you want to just mention that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we will do a whole series of videos on flipped classroom and how to deliver a flipped classroom in the most appropriate way, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there about what it is and how it should work. But I wanted my students to be active from the very first moment that the lesson started and not reliant on me. So I wanted increased independence. And I also wanted them to not come into class and the first thing they ask is, what are we learning today? And the second thing is it going to be fun? And I just wanted to sort of stop those two things happening. I wanted them to know what they were going to learn ahead of the lesson and come in and get on with it, start it. Don't wait for me to sort of, as Craig says, impart my knowledge. I want you to take responsibility and I want you to be able to learn something outside of the lesson. And of course, the massive benefit of that is you've gained so much lesson time. As Craig said, he was looking at the specification thinking, how am I going to teach this enormous specification in the same amount of time? Well, what you do is make time. How do you make time in a finite amount of time? Well, you put more emphasis on the learning outside of the lesson, which is effectively what happens there. So we needed, we couldn't just lose this chalk and talk part, you know, the bit where you stand at the front and you deliver the content to the student. We couldn't completely lose that because that was really important. What we couldn't do is do it in the lesson because there wasn't enough time and it didn't create enough independence. So we thought, well, why don't we create videos for everything, every single specification point? Students can watch the videos ahead of the lesson, and then when they come into the lesson, we've already done the teaching part. We don't need to start with that. We can start with activities instead. Now, I know that if the teachers are watching this and you haven't tried Flipped Classroom, you'll have all sorts of questions about, well, what if they don't watch the videos, and what if this and what if that? And we'll cover all those points in subsequent videos. But in essence, we needed the videos on YouTube so that our students could watch it. What we didn't bank on, because this is how naive we were, what we didn't bank on is, of course, because they're now out in the public domain, that students up and down the country can watch these things. We created them for our own students. And all of a sudden, we're finding that we've got thousands of students up and down the country watching them, and we didn't really think that was going to be a thing.
Yeah, I guess really, I mean, we can talk about this for ages, but this is another series of videos. We have essentially answered the questions. You know, how did Craig and Dave start? It started out of the new OCR A-level specification and us realizing if we think this is hard, other teachers are going to find this hard. We're going to develop the course anyway. What can we do about that? Can we share what we've got? And that's where it came. And it wasn't even a company formally for the first year. We did it informally, and then we formalized a company through Company's House. And of course, as Dave and I articulated, we then thought about how we're going to make these resources, you know, what's the best way that they could be delivered. And I think it's been articulated really well. Now, obviously, 5-6 years later, you know, we've got a very established company now. You know, we've got a very strong way of doing things, but you know, there it is, Dave. I was just going to get rid of that banner. You know, there's our mission statement and values, and it just sums up. We didn't prompt this. It's exactly what you just said. 3 values: strive every lesson to be an outstanding lesson by using contemporary pedagogy and active learning. Every teacher, no matter their experience, feel they have the knowledge of the course and want every student to have the opportunity to enjoy learning computer science. And I think really that is, you know, it feels very corporate there, our values and our mission, but it's not corny. That is what we really have strived to do. That was the essence behind the formation of Craig and Dave. And you know, that's where it got us where we are today. So, yeah. Any other little closing thoughts, Dave, or should we wrap it up there for today?
I think you've pretty much summed it up there, Craig, and in future videos we'll explore those topics in more detail. Yeah,
brilliant. Well, thank you everyone again, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.